In the forgotten reaches of deep space where the silence is older than time, and abandoned stations drift like the bones of long-dead gods, something stirs. A signal. It isn't loud. It isn't clear. But it is alive. It pulses like a heartbeat. Not human. Not machine. Something in between. And someone hears it. Her name is Mira, a xenobiologist sent to study what should have been empty metal and cold air. A lone scientist, chasing questions the universe forgot to answer. But what she finds is not just alien. It's impossible. A creature massive, wounded, coiled in silence. Breathing not with lungs, but with memory. Watching her with golden eyes that have seen empires rise and burn. He is not lost. He is Vorr, sentinel of a broken empire. Sworn to a ruler long vanished. Hunted for a truth that entire civilizations have tried to erase. Now the past has a pulse again. And the galaxy is holding its breath. What lies within the haunted corridors of Astra 9? What drove Thaler, heir to the outer rings, out of exile and into the fire? This is not a rescue. Not an accident. This is a convergence. You're about to witness a moment that was never meant to survive history. Stay with us. Look closer. Because in this galaxy, the past doesn't stay buried. It remembers. And now, it's remembering you. Mira whispers. Okay, pressure's stable. Oxygen low but good enough for one sweep. Her boots strike the grated floor with hollow echoes. Dust floats in slow motion, disturbed by her breath. The emergency lights flicker dimly, casting long, shifting shadows like ghosts crawling across the walls. The scanner in her hand flashes yellow. Something organic. Moving. Nearby. She slows her pace. The air feels heavier here, not because of gravity, but because of presence. The corridor narrows. Pipes hang low, some dripping thick, amber fluid that steams on contact with her suit. Something once lived here. Or still does. Her flashlight sweeps left. Something moves. Just a flicker, a shape slipping into darkness. Too fast. Too silent. She freezes. Hand on the sidearm at her hip. The scanner pulses red now. Organic. Alive. Breathing. Ahead, a door hangs half open, twisted from some past impact. Beyond it, darkness thicker than shadow. She steps closer. Then she sees it. Lying there half in light, half in dark is something massive. Not human. Not machine. Something other. A large creature, hunched and coiled in pain. Its chest rises and falls, slow and shallow. One arm twitches. The armor it wears is scorched and shattered, as if it crawled through fire and war just to die here. Its skin is like obsidian laced with veins of dim, pulsating blue. One leg is mangled. Its claws are coated with dried blood that glimmers like liquid crystal. And its face is mostly hidden beneath a broken mask. But one golden eye is visible. Half open. Watching her. Alive. Mira, shocked, under her breath. What the hell? She doesn't move. Doesn't breathe. The creature's eye narrows. Not in fear, Not in pain. In focus. It's assessing her. Studying her. Not prey. Not threat. Something else. The silence between them stretches a string pulled tight across two unknown worlds. Then, softly, it exhales. A long, slow breath that sounds almost deliberate. And Mira, against every protocol, every instinct, does not run. She steps forward. The lights in the medbay flicker softly, casting pale, shifting shadows across the room. The metal walls seem to pulse faintly with the low throb of the station's ancient systems. The creature lies on a makeshift examination table, massive, motionless, and barely breathing. Its body is armored in jagged scales, like volcanic obsidian cracked with glowing veins. Pale blue light pulses beneath the surface, slow and rhythmic, like a signal meant for something not human. Its left arm is badly burned. The plating is melted back, exposing raw alien tissue that glistens and smokes faintly in the cold air. The wound is unnatural, like it came from a weapon designed to erase, not kill. Its chest rises, falls, uneven but steady. And then, the golden eyes open. Only for a moment, but long enough. Eyes that are not just alive, but aware. Mira, softly, to herself. This isn't in any database. Not reptilian. Not insectoid. What are you? She crouches beside it, carefully scanning its form. Her hands move slowly. She knows sudden movements could be fatal. The scanner blinks wildly. Readouts flicker between unknown organ structures, impossible neural maps, and energy signatures that make no biological sense. She opens a vial of dark green medical gel, an adaptive compound designed to treat any known organic tissue. But this thing defies everything she's known. Still, she reaches out. The moment the gel touches its burned arm, the creature jerks. Not violently, more like a reflex. Muscles flex under armor, claws shift slightly. As sound rumbles deep in its chest, not a growl, but something older. Like a machine waking up after 1,000 years. Mira freezes. Watches. Waits. But it doesn't attack. Doesn't flee. Mira, softly. It's okay. I won't hurt you. The wound begins to change. The gel reacts with the crystalline blood, stabilizing it. Cell structures rearrange, healing at a microscopic level. Skin knits together, but not randomly. There's design in it. Like the body knows how to rebuild itself with precision, as if following ancient code. The creature exhales again. Slower. Deeper. And for the first time, its breathing becomes steady. The golden eyes open again, this time wider. Focused. They meet Mira's gaze, unblinking. She feels something shift. Not in the room. Inside her. This isn't just survival instinct. This is trust. A fragile, silent moment shared between species from different stars. She doesn't speak. She doesn't move. She simply stays. The station groans. Somewhere deep in its frame, metal shifts like a forgotten leviathan stirring in sleep. Mira opens her eyes slowly. She dozed off in the corner of the medbay, slouched against the wall, one hand still holding her tablet, its screen now dark. Her head snaps up. The examination table is empty. She rises carefully, breath held. Her eyes scan the shadows, heart thudding hard against her ribs. Then she sees it. The creature, no, the being is standing. Tall. Towering. Alive. Its frame fills the room, broad shoulders brushing against hanging cables. The wounds on its arm have partially healed, though faint lines of glowing blue still pulse beneath the surface like living circuitry. Its head tilts slightly, golden eyes locked onto her. There is no aggression in its stance. Only readiness. Vorr, growling, voice low and unfamiliar. Where is this? Mira's body stiffens. Her mouth opens but no words come. 1,000 questions flood her mind, scientific, tactical, existential, but only one escapes her lips. Mira, startled, stunned. You talk. The being straightens. There's a rhythm to his breath, now mechanical, practiced, like a warrior coming out of stasis. He lifts his chin slightly, not in arrogance, but in purpose. Vorr. I am Vorr. Sentinel class. Sworn protector of Thaler. Mira takes a step back, but not from fear. From realization. The title hangs in the air like a relic, heavy and unfamiliar, yet spoken with absolute clarity. Her eyes search his, those alien eyes that, just a day ago, were dim with pain. Mira whispers. You're not an animal. You're a soldier. Vorr, calmer now, voice firm, distant. I am more than that. The lights flicker. For a heartbeat, all is still. She studies him, this being not just shaped by war, but by duty. By something older. Something sacred. There is memory behind his gaze. Not just pain. Not just orders. But history. She realizes, in that quiet moment, she's not in the presence of a lab specimen. She's standing before the last echo of a forgotten empire. Mira slowly lowers her hands. Her voice softer, steadier. Mira. Thaler. Who is that? Vorr doesn't answer. Not yet. His eyes drift to the small viewport beside her where the stars wait beyond the broken hull. Where something, someone, might still be watching. And in that silence, Mira knows. Whatever this being is, whatever war he came from, he didn't survive by chance. He was made to endure. And something or someone is coming. The control room of Astra 9 is quiet, unnaturally quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears like static that never fully forms into sound. Old monitors hum with life they shouldn't have. Power flickers through cables long thought dead. One of the consoles begins to pulse with soft yellow light. Slow. Deliberate. Like a heartbeat waking after too long in darkness. Mira steps toward it, her boots making no sound on the dusty floor. Her fingers hover above the controls. She doesn't touch them yet. Her body knows something her mind hasn't caught up with. Then the console pings. Once. Again. A third time. She swallows and taps the screen. And the truth reveals itself. A ship. In orbit. Large. Cold. Silent. No markings. No identification codes. No transmissions. Just there. Waiting. Mira, softly, eyes wide. That's not a supply ship. She brings up the scan data. Hull composition, unknown alloy. Stealth patterns active. Weapon systems, online. She stares at the screen, willing it to lie. It doesn't. Mira whispers to herself. Someone's here. They found you. A shadow moves behind her. Vorr steps into the doorway, tall and still. The faint light catches the edges of his armor, painting him in reflections of gold and blue. He doesn't need to look at the screen. He already knows. Vorr. Low, grim. Hunters. They come to erase what I protect. Mira turns sharply toward him, her pulse spiking. Her mind races. Erase. Not kill. Not capture. Erase. Wipe out. Silence. Obliterate. This wasn't about one sentinel. This was about secrets, old ones, buried in steel and memory. And Vorr. Vorr was the last piece. She grabs her data pad, fingers moving faster than thought. Lock down non-essential systems. Cut power to the outer rings. Mask life signs. Everything she knows how to do, a scientist improvising as a soldier. But it won't be enough. Mira, urgent. We don't have time. If they scan this place, they'll detect your energy signature. We need to move. Vorr doesn't argue. He simply nods, following her with the heavy silence of someone who has done this before too many times. They pass through the central corridor. Lights dim. Dust swirls. The hum of the ship overhead grows stronger, a presence pressing downward, like a storm about to break open the sky. Mira leads him to the lower levels, where the walls are stained with age, and warning signs in a dozen forgotten languages line the floor. She pries open an old maintenance hatch. It groans in protest. Inside is narrow, barely wide enough for Vorr's broad frame. Mira. Stay here. If they see you, they'll kill us both. You know that. Vorr looks down at the small, rusted chamber. Then at her. His golden eyes lock onto hers, ancient, unreadable. But in them is not fear. It's choice. Vorr. If they breach, you run. Mira, shaking her head. No, I didn't bring you back just to lose you now. A beat passes. Heavy. Unspoken. Then he crouches, folding himself into the shadows. She seals the hatch with a soft hiss of airlocks re-engaging. And just like that, he's gone. Mira is alone again. She straightens. Her hands tremble, but her eyes harden. She turns back toward the control room, toward the threat waiting above. She knows what comes next. Interrogation. Incursion. Death. But she also knows something else. They think she's just a scientist. They are wrong. Up in the black, the hunter ship begins to descend. And Astra 9 prepares to remember what war feels like. The station trembled not from impact, but from awareness. Astra 9, long dormant, felt it. The presence. The pressure. The return. Above, the stars shifted. Space itself bent like silk being drawn tight, and from that silent fold, a vessel emerged. Sleek. Elegant. Alien. It glided toward the station without sound, leaving no wake, casting no shadow. Its surface gleamed like pearl under starlight, etched with glowing runes that shimmered and rippled as if alive. The markings were not merely decoration, they were language, oath, memory. It docked with perfect precision, as if Astra 9 had always been waiting for it. Mira stood in the upper control corridor, staring at the inbound readings. Her console couldn't classify the ship. No power source. No registry. No emissions. It was like the ship existed slightly out of phase, not fully here, but undeniably real. She wasn't breathing. She didn't notice. Her hand hovered near the emergency override. Her other rested over the hidden pistol she hadn't touched in years. Then the docking clamps engaged. A hiss. A subtle shift in air pressure. Doors that hadn't moved in decades slid open with fluid grace. Light spilled into the corridor. But it wasn't white. It wasn't gold. It was something older. Something remembered. Then, he stepped through. A man? No, not a man. Humanoid in form, yes. But nothing about him was ordinary. He moved like a shadow wrapped in silk, his long cloak rippling in the still air. His skin bore the faint glow of starlight, silver tattoos curled across his arms and throat like constellations made flesh. His eyes were deep and still, like lakes on planets with no name. And yet, there was calm in him. Authority not worn, but embedded like stone that had learned patience. Thaler, softly, like a memory returning. I am High Chancellor Thaler. You have something that belongs to me. Mira didn't respond. Couldn't. Her mouth moved, but no sound escaped. She took a step back. And that was when she heard it. Footsteps. Behind her. Measured. Heavy. Familiar. She turned and saw Vorr. He stood at the far end of the corridor, framed by the dim station lights. Armor cracked. Limbs stiff. Eyes burning. He had come. He had heard. And he was still standing. Thaler turned slowly. When his eyes found Vorr, something in the room shifted. Gravity felt thicker. Time, slower. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he stepped forward, crossing the distance between them with silent grace. He stopped just a few feet away. Then, the barest smile touched his lips. Not triumphant. Not joyful. Something else. Something like grief. Thaler, quietly. Old friend. You made it. Vorr bowed his head, not deeply but with weight. With meaning. Mira watched in silence. The tension between them was not fear, it was history. There was pain in the air. Shared pain. Echoes of battles no one remembered. Names no longer spoken. Thaler raised a hand not to touch, but to acknowledge. Then he turned to Mira. Thaler. And you? You brought him back. She nodded slowly. Mira, softly. He nearly died. Thaler, with regret. He always does. There was no humor in the words. Only memory. Thaler walked past her, examining the station's walls with quiet reverence. Thaler. This place was one of ours once. Before the collapse. Before the purge. He turned back. The fact that it still stands, that he still stands, means fate hasn't finished with us. Mira looked at Vorr. Mira. Who are you really? Vorr's gaze didn't move from Thaler. Vorr. The last shield of a dying throne. Thaler exhaled. A sound like wind through stone. Thaler. And now, perhaps the first stone of something new. Above them, unseen, the hunter ship drifted closer. And far in the black beyond that others were watching. For Thaler's arrival was no accident. It was a signal. A spark. And Vorr remembers sparks. The room was quiet. No hum of machinery. No echo of alarms. Just stillness. Mira sat across from Thaler at a long, curved table, one crack from time and war. A fractured viewport behind them offered a glimpse of the stars, distant and impassive. Between them sat the silence of two worlds trying to understand each other. Vorr stood nearby, still as stone. His presence filled the room like gravity. Watching. Listening. Thaler's hands rested calmly on the table. His gaze was steady, but his voice held weight. Each word carried memory like blood carries history. Thaler. The outer rings once spanned systems. Worlds bound not by fear, but by oath. My family ruled not with force, but with legacy. With balance. He paused. But legacies are fragile things. And oaths are easier to break than to keep. Mira watched him carefully. There was no arrogance in his tone. Just pain, and the sharp precision of someone who'd had too long to remember. Thaler, quietly. We were betrayed. From within. Generals. Scholars. Those we trusted most. They wanted power without the burden of tradition. They wanted control, without memory. His eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, Mira saw something else beneath the calm rage. Thaler. My family was marked for extinction. Our worlds were purged. Palaces turned to ash. Bloodlines severed with surgical precision. He turned his gaze to Vorr. Thaler. Vorr was not just my protector. He was my brother in arms. He pulled me from the fire when the world fell around us. He carried me through vacuum. Through shadow. Through death. Vorr didn't speak. He didn't have to. The burn scars along his armor, the lines of fatigue beneath his eyes, they told enough. Thaler. And in saving me, he was marked too. Hunted. Like me. Like the truth itself. Mira looked down at her hands. At her knuckles, white from how tightly she was gripping the edge of the chair. She wanted to say something. Wanted to deny what she already knew was true. Mira, softly. Now you're hunted, because you still carry truth. Thaler. And truth. He leaned forward slightly. Is dangerous. A long pause. The silence grew heavy. Mira looked up again, her voice steadier now, but quiet. Confused. Suspicious. Mira. Why tell me all this? Why me? Thaler's expression softened. He tilted his head slightly like a teacher considering how much to reveal to a student. Thaler. Because you helped Vorr? You healed him. Protected him. Risked your life for him. You didn't do it for power. Or knowledge. You did it without knowing who or what he truly was. He leaned back, folding his hands together. Thaler. That makes you more than a scientist. It makes you part of our story now. His words lingered like the aftershock of something deeper. Mira didn't respond immediately. She couldn't. Her mind was racing, galaxies opening inside her skull. Questions spiraled. Doubt screamed. But under all of it, something else was growing. A weight. A pull. Not fear. Not curiosity. Destiny. Outside, in the void, the hunter ship remained silent. Waiting. And deep within the hidden folds of space, something older than all of them began to stir. It started with silence. Then the floor vibrated. A tremor. Faint, but unmistakable. Mira felt it before she heard the sound. A subtle change in the air. Pressure shifting. Then distant metal screaming as old doors were forced open. The hunters had breached the station. Emergency lights flickered red. A deep alarm activated, one she hadn't even known still worked. Somewhere in the upper decks, boots hit metal. Not marching, hunting. The kind of steps that didn't belong to rescue teams or diplomats. She turned to Vorr, but he was already moving. No words. Just motion. Purpose. Precision. He pulled her toward the wall. A hidden panel slid aside with a groan, revealing a narrow shaft lined with coolant pipes and corroded wiring. Mira hesitated only for a second, then followed. Inside the shaft, the space was barely wide enough for one. Vorr moved ahead, clearing the path, his broad frame brushing against the walls, scraping armor that had already seen too much war. Behind them, the hunters fanned out. Quiet, efficient. They weren't searching. They were tracking. Mira slipped, caught herself. Her breathing was loud, now too loud. She could feel the heat from Vorr's wounds radiating through the tight space. Bluish or not quite blood trailed behind them in faint droplets. He was hurt again. But he never slowed. Mira, whispers, breathless. Why are you still helping me? They paused at a junction. Vorr turned to face her, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark, his breath shallow but steady. Vorr, softly. Because you saw me as something worth saving. The words hit harder than the alarms. In that cramped space, with danger tightening around them, Mira felt the world shift. He wasn't talking about biology, or function, or even survival. He was talking about being seen. Truly seen. Not as a weapon. Not as a relic. But as someone, not something. They moved again, deeper into the maze of Astra 9. Lights above burst into sparks as the hunters passed through. A voice echoed, not human, not quite. Cold. Mechanical. Scan complete. Life form detected. Moving towards Sector 9. Vorr stopped. He pulled Mira down beside him, cloaking them in the darkness beneath the collapsed panel. She could hear her heart now. And his. Two rhythms, from two worlds, beating in sync. For a moment, there was no war. No empire. No hunters. Just the closeness of breath. The unspoken thread between them. Then Vorr moved again. Because they didn't have time. Not yet. The corridor is cracked open to the stars. Through a jagged breach in the wall, Mira can see the black canvas of space, calm, distant, endless. The stars twinkle like watchful eyes, silent witnesses to what is about to unfold. The cruiser hums softly beside her, its entry ramp lowered, glowing with unfamiliar runes that shift and glide like liquid language. Its surface breathes with ancient technology alive, waiting. Behind her, Astra 9 groans. The old station isn't just dying. It's dissolving, pulled apart by pressure and time, forgotten by the galaxy that built it. She feels it in her bones. This place won't hold much longer. Thaler stands just beyond the ramp, tall and still, his silhouette framed by golden blue light pouring from inside the ship. He says nothing at first. He knows what this moment is. Mira looks at him, then back at the corridor she just came from, dark, broken, earthbound. Behind her, Vorr walks up quietly. His footsteps are slower now, heavy with pain. But he stands tall beside her, silent as always, watching, waiting. She glances down and sees the trail of blood-blue crystal he's left behind. Thaler finally speaks, soft but firm. If you stay, Earth will question you, interrogate you, lock you away and dissect what you've seen and what you now are. He steps forward, just slightly. They won't believe your silence. And if they do, they'll fear it more than your words. Mira says nothing. She already knows it's true. Earth doesn't forgive what it doesn't understand. And she no longer fits inside its boundaries. Vorr, quietly, but with fire beneath the words. But if you come with us, you'll see wonders no human has ever known. Suns that sing. Oceans that remember. Species that dream while awake. A pause. And you won't have to run anymore. Mira closes her eyes. She can still feel the heat of the hunter's weapons in the air. The silence of Astra 9 breaking apart around her. The way Vorr bled to shield her. The way Thaler looked at her not as a trespasser, but as if she belonged. She came here to study life. But now life was asking her to choose. She looks at her hands. Covered in dirt, blood, time. Once tools of science. Now marked by something else. Mira, softly, not to anyone in particular. I was looking for life out there. She turns her head. Meets Vorr's eyes. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. In his silence, she finds an answer. Mira, a breath later, voice steady. I didn't know I'd become part of it. She steps forward. One step onto the ramp. Then another. And for the first time in a long time, she doesn't feel like she's falling. She feels like she's rising. Thaler nods. A quiet gesture of welcome, not command. The cruiser glows brighter, its systems awakening in response. Behind them, Astra 9 lets out one final groan, a sound like a collapsing cathedral. Mira turns to look one last time. The place where she met the unknown. The place where she stopped being alone. Mira, under her breath. Goodbye, old ghost. She enters the cruiser. The doors seal behind them with a sound softer than air. And in the silence that follows, they leave. Not as strangers, but as the beginning of something the stars had been waiting for. The stars no longer look the same. Not from here. Through the reinforced glass of the cruiser's observation deck, Mira stood, arms folded, eyes wide, breath caught somewhere between fear and awe. She had stared at stars her entire life. Through telescopes. Through domes. Through data streams. They had always been beautiful. But now, they were real. Close. Moving. Alive. Behind her, the ship purred softly, not like an engine, but like a living thing. The walls of the corridor shifted color in subtle waves, reacting to nearby thoughts, pulses, even breath. The architecture was grown, not built. It felt less like metal, and more like memory. She could feel it beneath her fingertips when she touched the wall, as if the ship itself recognized her. It didn't reject her presence. It welcomed it. Vorr entered the chamber quietly. His steps were slower now, but solid. The bandages Mira had wrapped still glowed faintly, healing through the ship's ambient energy. He stood beside her close, but not intruding. For a long moment, they said nothing. The silence was not empty. It was understanding. Mira, softly, still watching the stars. Astra 9 was never the end. Vorr. It was never meant to be. Mira turned to look at him. His eyes glowed softer here, no longer sharp with caution or pain. Just presence. Mira. Earth won't understand this. Vorr, quietly. That is why we left. In the distance, a binary star system drifted past them, casting light that shifted color as the ship moved through hyperspace. The cruiser bent around gravity wells like silk through water. Time no longer felt linear. And yet, Mira was grounded more than ever. She closed her eyes and remembered the moment she chose. Not because she had no other path, but because she wanted this one. Farther down the corridor, Thaler sat in a chamber of light meditating, surrounded by floating glyphs and silent orbs that spun slowly in gravitational fields of their own. He was communing with something beyond language, beyond thought. Even in silence, he was plotting. Not with malice, but with purpose. He carried the weight of a fallen empire, and now, a new variable stood in his shadow, Mira. Somewhere within the ship, systems began to shift. Panels restructured. Symbols rearranged. The cruiser was reconfiguring. For her. Mira returned her gaze to the stars. She whispered, not to Vorr, not to Thaler, not even to herself, but to the unknown. Mira, a quiet oath. I thought I came here to discover life. She paused, the stars catching in her eyes like silver fire. Mira. But now I see, life was waiting to discover me. The ship accelerated. Not with sound. Not with force. But with certainty. A ripple of light folded around the hull, and in a blink, the vessel disappeared into the void. And in the darkness they left behind, the first embers of a long-dead empire began to glow once more. For what had been forgotten was no longer lost. A choice was made. Not in haste, not in fear, but in that rare, terrifying stillness when the universe offers no guarantees, only questions wrapped in silence. Mira chose not to return. Not because she had no way back, but because something within her refused to belong to the world she came from. She didn't run. She stepped forward into a story that didn't begin with her, but might just end with her. Now she walks among the last echoes of an empire carved in stars. Among warriors bound by memory, and a ruler who speaks in riddles older than time. But the stars are not quiet. Their silence is a warning. The hunters are not gone. They are regrouping in shadows, behind masks, within systems that still pretend to be neutral. And the truth is beginning to wake. Something ancient stirs in Vorr's blood, something more than duty, more than memory. Something Mira touched, and changed. Thalos smiles with royal calm, but his eyes never rest. He speaks of rebirth, but from whose ashes? And far away, on Earth, someone is watching. They've seen the data, the breach, the disappearance. They will come looking. And when they find her, she won't be the Mira they remember. She'll be something else. So ask yourself, what would you choose? The comfort of ignorance, or the weight of the unknown? A world that welcomes you, or a galaxy that dares you to matter? If this story pulled you in, don't just watch in silence. Tell us what you think. What truth would you follow? Because this isn't the end. It's a doorway. And something out there is waiting. Not patiently. And not for long.